This morning, I'm so glad that you're here this morning. I want to review a little bit of last week before we get into the message for this morning. Last week, we talked about, I laid out kind of the mission and vision of the church for Pinecrest in this next year and beyond. And one of the things we talked about is how we were going, kids, you're dismissed. I keep forgetting that. Young ones, get out, all right? Go to your class. All right, that's good. Yeah, I should probably make a slide. One of the things we're talking about is this year centering on and focusing on the gospel of Jesus Christ and how we share that gospel, how it affects us, and then also how we share that gospel. We talked a little bit about last week, though, how sharing the gospel is kind of a scary thing. It's not for the faint of heart, it seems. In fact, if you think about the last year, the last 2 years, the last 5 years, and I don't want to hear the number, but how many people would you say you've shared the gospel with in the last year to 5 years? If you're like me, if you're like most Christians, you are ashamed of that number. And there's all kinds of reasons why that number tends to be so small. But one of our goals here at Pinecrest in the next 4 years now is to have 100 new believer baptisms. It is not our goal to grow as a church through assimilation from other churches, which is honestly how most churches grow nowadays. You just put on a better performance, you do a better show, things that Christians like better, and instead of going to the church down the road, they'll start coming here, and then most churches call that a success. You know who would not call that a success? God doesn't. Jesus would not call that a success. In fact, we talked about last week, the commission, the great commission and the great commandment that God has given to us is to share the gospel and make new disciples and to love people who don't know God. So we're going to focus for the next 8 weeks on how we do that. We want to take some of the fear out of it. Now, I'm just being honest, and I'm going to share with you a lot of the information we're going to share, in fact, most of the information we're going to share over the next week is coming out of this book. There's a big picture of it called Sharing Jesus Without Freaking Out. Now, I had a couple conversations this last week that tell me I was not very clear last week about what we're going to be doing. Because I said we're developing this into a class, much like our Bible class and our doctrine class, our beliefs class. And so I had some people who got the book and were asking me, and this is on me, Pastor, when does the class start this week? And I said, well, it's going to be Sunday during service. You're all in this class. So we're going to teach this class to everyone. Because my thought process was, look, I can create a class, but how many people are going to come to that class? Yeah, 8 to 10 people are going to show up. Guess how many people are here? Yeah, lots. More than 8. I'm not good at math, but I can tell you there are definitely more than 8 people here. So we're going to share. Kyle, did you correct the cameras like I asked you to? Yeah, that's good, son. Thank you. He's all over it now, though. Give Kyle a round of applause, will you? Yeah. All right. Heather got this one over here. That's how I know you didn't do them. You like my mug, though? Jesus saves, bro. Right? That's our message, right? We're going to talk about the gospel. So we're going to be walking through this book, Sharing Jesus Without Freaking Out. You can get the book if you want, but we're going to talk about the principles in the book. It's a great book. It's a great resource. But the other thing you've got in your hands, you should have in your hands, if you don't, you need to get one right now, is this sheet. And if you don't have one in your hands, and those, we put some new chairs up. So those of you in the far back, you may not have one. There are some on the tables in the back. There's some on the front row because no one likes to sit in the spit zone aside from one. All right, so we're going to walk through the principles in this book, and we're going to start with the beginning. We're going to talk about the 5 reasons why sharing Jesus freaks us out. So let's, and by the way, there's going to be blanks here, and then on the screen in green are the fill-ins for those blanks, all right? Now, some of you in the room do not care about the blanks. Raise your hands. You're like, I'm not going to fill out the blank. I don't care if there's a blank there or not, right? Some of you are like, if there's a blank, I'm filling it out. Raise your hands. All right, that's most of us. All right, so I'll make sure. If you don't have one, just scream, and I'll make sure. First, look on the screen, and if you can't figure it out, ask the person next to you. And then if you still can't figure it out, shout, and I'll fill it in for you. All right? Are you ready to go with the 5 reasons why sharing Jesus freaks us out? Yes. Number 1 is the potential for embarrassment. And I hear this one a lot. And it's connected really to the other 4. We think if I share the gospel, I'm going to be embarrassed because I might not do it right? Which is number 2, is not knowing exactly how to do it. I don't know how to share the gospel. I don't know how to share. Well, that's what we're going to talk about for the next 8 weeks. So we're going to try and get rid of that one. Number 3 is not being sure that you can answer all the questions that someone might ask. How many of you would say, yeah, that's mine. I'm afraid of the questions and I may not have the answer, right? All right, number 4 is not wanting to offend or be thought of as weird, narrow, or pushy. How many of you would say, yep, that's mine? Yeah, and I'm not going to ask if it's the weird, the narrow, or the pushy part. Probably not the weird, because you're weird anyway, right? We're all just different kinds of weird. And number 5 is not wanting to be grouped in with any radicals. In a lot of cases, man, I don't want people to know I'm a Christian because Christians have a bad name. Our culture does not look too fondly on those who carry that title. Right? So would you say that your list, your reason is on that board? Right? And maybe a couple of them, right? And in fact, why don't you circle the ones that you would say, yep, that's mine. What we're going to do over the next week is try and alleviate all of that so that you don't feel embarrassed, so that you know exactly what to do, so that you are ready to answer some of the questions or at least learn the best 3 words you can learn when someone asks you a question. I don't know. And then follow it up with, but I'll find out. Right? Which really just allows the conversation to continue. And we're going to teach you a way to do this without offending or being pushy. But can I let you know something? You probably are going to offend someone and they may feel that you're pushy, which may lead you to be embarrassed a little bit. But we're going to show you how to do this in a way that doesn't freak people out. All right? And don't worry about being grouped in with any radical. Following Jesus is pretty radical. It's not a normal thing. All right? So we're going to walk through how we do this. And I want to read to you the introduction to the book because it's really good. He says, there are millions of people who do not know Jesus. Do you agree with that? Yes. Some of them are your friends. And they are the point of this book and the point of this series. Sharing Jesus with someone else is what's the right word for it? And he says, it's freak you out. Does it freak you out? If so, we understand. You probably wouldn't equate it with the kind of freaking out that makes you want to run screaming to get away from something that suddenly scared you or startled you. It's more like the reluctance you might feel if you were to think about asking your boss for a raise. It's one of those conversations you would do just about anything to avoid because it makes you so uncomfortable. What if the person demeans you or gets mad at you? You can't know ahead of time where this thing is likely to go. So it's the awkwardness of it. The potential for embarrassment, not knowing how to do it, not being sure you can answer all the questions, not wanting to offend, right? All those things we got on the board. It's all of those fears, isn't it? But here's the key. It doesn't have to be. And we intend to start convincing you of this from the start, in the very first chapter. In fact, if we could boil down into a single line all the principles behind all 8 chapters of this book, here's what we plan on helping you discover about sharing Jesus with others. Number 1, evangelism doesn't have to be uncomfortable. 2, you are under no pressure to prove anything. 3, it just really amounts to having a conversation. 4, in almost any context, provides the opportunity for that evangelism conversation. 5, you can spot these opportunities when you listen. 6, because people talk about what's best for them. 7, so think of evangelism as building a relationship with somebody. And 8, and intentionally planning to share Jesus as part of everyday living. Sharing Jesus with another person is really no more daunting or complicated than that. And since we believe you're already fully on board with the last of these 8 principles, or else you wouldn't be here to begin with. That's not true because you haven't bought the book, right? You've made it come for some other reason. There's no doubt this is something that you can do. And I want you to know this is something that you can do. And it's something that Jesus commands us to do. And it doesn't have to be so freaky. It doesn't have to freak us out. It's not supposed to be that way. And it just takes some principles. It takes some education. It takes some guidance. It takes some learning. And so that's what we're going to do over the next 8 weeks. That's the job of the church, is to equip you to do the things that God has called you to do. Would you agree with that? Right? If you don't, read the Bible. It's there. All right, so what we're going to do is share with you these 8 principles over the next 8 weeks. Now, did you catch the key word? 8 what? Principles. I want to tell you, I'm not going to teach you a system or a model of evangelism. How many of you have ever gone through one of those, like Romans Road or the 4 spiritual laws, handout tracts? And I'm not denigrating any of those. I think there's a question whether some of them are as effective today as they were at one time. I'm not going to ask you to memorize anything. I'm not going to give you a tool or a system. I'm going to give you some principles so that once this becomes a part of who you are and you release the anxiety about it, it becomes a natural outflow of your life. Now, if you want to learn the Romans Road to help in that process, great. If you want to learn the 4 spiritual laws, that's great. Google it. And you'll get all kinds of resources. What I want to talk about are some principles for helping you remove and alleviate these fears. How's that sound? Yeah. All right? So, here's the key, and I want you to understand this. You do not need to be an expert to get started in this process. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but think of any expert in any field. You got something in mind? They were not an expert when they began. You don't wake up one morning and you're an expert at something. How do you get there? Before practice. Right? You learn, you study, you research, and then you put it into practice. Think about a surgeon, okay? Would you want to go to a surgeon who would say, you know what, I haven't even been to class yet. and I've never done this even one time, not even on a dummy. But you are going to be my first. I just figured, I slept at a Holiday Inn last night. So I'm good. What would you say to that surgeon? Thanks, but no thanks. Right? And even for you, you qualify. How many of you can drive a car? How many of you remember the day when you could not drive a car? Any of you remember the first moment you drove a car? It was terrifying. How many of you remember, if you've got kids, the first time your kids drove alone in your car? It's a terrifying moment, right? In fact, when you first learn to drive, how many of you can drive a stick, by the way? I want to see. Oh! What? That's crazy. That's awesome. All right? And by the way, those of you who can drive a stick, you are better than those who cannot. Yeah. I'm sorry. But whether you drive a stick or an automatic, you remember when you first learned to drive, there's 800 things you have to think about. And you have to think about those things, right? I remember one time when I was learning to drive, I got my driver's license. I was driving with my grandparents, and we came up to a red light, right? And I was turning right. Well, what's the rule? Can you turn on a red light? Turn right on a red light? Yeah, I knew it. So I just drove up and turned. And my grandfather, bless his heart, may he rest in peace, sitting in the passenger seat, just calmly as could be, he looked over at me and said, "You're not going to stop, huh?" And I said, "I don't have to. You can turn right on a red light." He said, "Yeah. After you stop and make sure no one's going to kill you coming the other way." Right? Yeah, but it wasn't in my head, right? I was thinking about, I got to hit the blinker, I got to hit the brake, all those things. How many of you drove here this morning and you couldn't even tell me anything about the driving? How many of you have ever been driving? You've been driving like through Kansas for 2 hours, and you're like, I don't even know where those 2 hours were. You're just on autopilot, right? As you begin to learn things, but that's not where you started. So don't think you've got to be the expert and have all the answers and do it just perfectly. God does not call us to do that. We've got to learn and grow and develop and put things into practice. We all start somewhere. So let's just start, and then we're going to gain some experience as we go. So let's start at the beginning place, right? Because we're going to talk about how, this is where your notes are going to come in, right? Sharing Jesus does not have to be uncomfortable. Here is principle number 1. You have all that you need to begin sharing Jesus with other people right now. And I mean right now. As you sit here in your seat right now, you have everything that you need. And because of that, there's no reason to be uncomfortable. But here's the problem. We have turned evangelism and sharing Jesus into this, that we associate it with something that's unpleasant, something to be avoided, unnatural, and uncomfortable. Would you agree with that? I mean, when you think about sharing Jesus, your palms probably get a little sweaty. Your heart starts to race. That's not how it should be. The kind of evangelism we're talking about and that we're going to be sharing together is really focused on the things that you already know and the things that you already have, and talking to people that you already love and care for. So you should be excited about it, not afraid of it. Amen. Some of you don't look like you believe me. So let me share with you the 3 basics. We're going to talk about 3 basics of sharing your faith without freaking out. Are you ready? Yes. All right, number 1, evangelism is an overflow of the Christian life. You know Jesus, He saved you, and all He wants you to do is talk about Him. That sounds simple, right? Now, there's all kinds of reasons why we don't do it, right? There's fear, we get distracted, we have other things going on, we're flat out disobedient, which is one of the things I want to instill in us. If we're not doing this, we are being disobedient to the commandment of Jesus Christ. And disobedience to a command of God is the very definition of sin. If you are not sharing Jesus Christ as a natural outflow of your Christian life, you are sinning against the very commandment that Jesus gives us. And we don't want to be that way, right? We want to be excited about sharing the gospel. And it's part of who you are. Grab your Bible and turn to 1 Peter chapter 2. Verse 9. And I will take a drink out of my Jesus Saves Burrow mug while you do that. And right before verse 9, Peter is talking about those who don't do the things that God calls them to do, that stumble because they don't obey God's word. But he says, but you are not like that. For you are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. And as a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for He called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. So the first question I have is, did God call you out of darkness into His light? Yes. Yeah. Are you a chosen people? Yes. And by the way, the you there, this is one of those cases where we got to be careful about Americanizing God's word. The you there is plural. The English vernacular, the American vernacular is all y'all. Right? You could circle that and just say all y'all. All y'all are royal priests. Now, when you think about being a priest, what comes to mind? The collar. Wow. You went Catholic on us. I was back further than that. Yeah. Holy living. Teacher. Access to God. Yeah. Why are we called priests? I mean, didn't we get rid of that whole sacrificial system? Didn't we get rid of the whole temple thing? Aren't we the temple? Aren't we where God resides? So what is this priest thing all about? I mean, the sacrifice has been made once and for all, right? What does a priest do? What was a priest's primary role? Intercession. Yeah, he's a go-between. Between what? between God and others. That's what a priest does, is bridge the gap between God and others. And he says, you, all y'all, all of us are priests, royal priests, part of God's holy nation. And he says, and because of that, as a result, you can show others the goodness of God, because he calls you out of the darkness into the light, and he wants you to help others move from the darkness. I'm thinking about this area right here because it's very dark over here. Right? We've got to get that light bulb changed, but we got to let the snow melt to get the thing in, right? So he calls you out of darkness into the light. And he wants you to do the same thing. It's supposed to be a natural outflow of the Christian life. If you're not sharing the gospel, then something is wrong in your walk with God. And we want to repair that. Got real quiet in the room. Pastor, how dare you tell me something might be wrong, right? All right. You are a priest. Priests connect. You are God's. Here's the thing. And I want you to get this. You are God's chosen means for spreading the gospel. Do you remember, and this is going back a ways, and this is only for you Bronco fans. The rest of you won't understand this. But you remember when John Elway used to be the GM of the Broncos? And he had like the best thing in his life fall in his lap. Peyton Manning. Right? And they brought Peyton Manning in, and some reporters said at the time they weren't sure. Peyton Manning had neck surgery, and they weren't sure how he was going to do. And someone asked John Elway, hey, what's plan B in case Peyton Manning can't play? Do you remember John Elway's response? There's no plan B. This is it. And I think Christians have this idea that there's a plan B for sharing the gospel. That's not true. You're it. You are God's one and only plan. If you don't share the gospel with the people in your life, it doesn't get shared. It's as simple as that. Your plan A, B, and C. God's put literally all of his eggs in your basket. Oh, that reminds me. Yeah, we're probably not going to have breakfast burritos for a little while because we can't afford or find eggs. So we're going to put the little pause button on that until the state of Colorado figures out that the decision they made was a really stupid one. All right? So that's number one. Evangelism is an overflow of the Christian life. Number two, evangelism is storytelling. How many of you like a good story? Yeah, we love telling stories. We love hearing stories. Right? In fact, I want to tell you a story right now to kind of prove the point. But Anita and I was sharing, I asked her to help me figure out a story that I haven't already told here. That's very difficult because I like sharing stories, right? And she named one. I was like, nope, I've told that one like more than once. So here's the only one she could think of. I got to be honest. I couldn't think of any. She thought of one. When we were younger, much younger, I won't tell you how much younger, but we were not even married yet, I had the coolest car in the whole world. It was a Datsun 200 SX. Oh, man, that thing was beautiful. It was a stick shift, and we were driving. I don't even remember where we were going back to my house. I was driving you home from church. Was it from church? Okay, yeah, church, because that sounds better. No, I was driving her home from college, and it was a snowstorm struck. And I'm trying to get my soon-to-be bride. Were we engaged at the time? Yeah, I think we were engaged. I got to show her that I'm the man. I can get her home, right? In a snowstorm in a Datsun 200 SX. Now, let me tell you a little bit about a Datsun 200 SX. It is rear-wheel drive. It is light. It weighs just about nothing. It's about that far off of the ground. And we came up a hill. What was the road? Was it Kipling? It was Kipling. And we went down this road and up this side. And I thought, okay, I know what to do. You get as much speed as you can here so that on here, you're good to go. You got to gain that momentum, right? Well, and I stood at the top of the hill, right? This down and up. And we stood at the top, and there were cars There was a traffic jam because cars trying to decide, is this a good idea or not? Should we do this? Plows had not been out. Snow was at least a foot at the time, maybe? Yeah, at least a foot at the time. And at the top of the hill, and you can see cars on the other side. And they're not making it up. They're starting to slide backwards. Now, the normal human response is, this is not a good idea. When you're a man with your fiancée in the car, I can do it. And so I took off. I said, just don't stop. Whatever you do not stop. We got maybe halfway up the hill, and the Datsun said, oh no, this is stupid. So we got over to the side of the road. Now, this is in a day and age, some of you young people won't understand this, where we did not have cell phones. Yeah. I don't know why y'all think that's so funny. So here we are, stuck on the side of the road in a Datsun 200SX, several miles away from home, in a blizzard. And I did not know what to do. And that was one of those miles that was dumb. That was a really stupid idea. And so I did what any normal human being would do. We got out and started to walk. And I think we got to a gas station. And again, for those of you who don't remember these, they had these things on the wall called a telephone. And you put money in the phone, you make some phone calls, right? And I called my grandfather, and he just laughed. He said, good luck. At least you're at a place where they got plenty of food, right? And so we were trying to figure out what to do, and this dude in a Mazda MPV drove up and said, I'll take you. And he drove us home, and that thing plowed through the snow. I was like, I'm buying a Mazda MPV. I'm getting rid of this Datsun 200SX, which I did not do. I did not buy a Mazda MPV at the time, but I probably should have. And we got home safe and sound with my pride in tatters. Right? What did you notice during that whole story? You were all engaged in that process. It's a stupid story about me getting stuck in a snowstorm, and it's the only part of this whole sermon you're going to remember tomorrow. You're going to be like, Pastor Dave's so stupid. Got out in a Datsun 200SX. What kind of moron does something like that, right? We remember stories. Stories matter to us. It's how we're built. In fact, how do most stories begin? Yeah, no. What? Say it again. Once upon a time. You know where that comes from? Right here. How does this one start? In the beginning. By the way, both the Old Testament and the New Testament begin that way. In the beginning. Once upon a time. God's story is built into us. This idea of storytelling and story hearing is a part of who we are. And in evangelism, sharing the gospel is no different than that. All right, let me share with you another quote out of the book, page 10. Storytelling is what evangelism really is. The gospel, at its heart, is the story of God reaching out to the people He made and enabling them to live in right relationship with Him because of what Jesus Christ has done on their behalf. Every Christian knows this story. You know this story. And evangelism is just about telling that story. Okay? Number 3. Oh, yeah, I wanted to say this. I wrote this down to make sure it was important. Evangelism, I think this is one of the things that makes us feel afraid of it, is not a sales pitch. You are not selling Jesus and hoping somebody buys. You are telling His story. You're telling people about the love that someone else who created them has for them. Nothing could be less terrifying than that. But if you feel like you're selling Jesus and that you failed if they don't buy it, yeah, that can be kind of terrifying. I mean, we all love a good salesman, right? Right. All right. Number 3, evangelism is relational. It's about connecting people you love with a God who loves them. That's what it is. It's relational. It's why, by the way, and I remember we went to a Bronco game earlier this year, and this isn't about the game, although every game I've gone to this year, they've won. Yeah, one game that I went to. Very small sample size. But we were walking to the car afterwards in this huge crowd. I don't know if you've ever tried to walk back after the Bronco game across the bridge. You know the bridge you got to walk across? And it was just people everywhere. And there were these two guys standing up on a light pole, and they had the signs and the bull horns, and they were telling people they were sinners and they were going to hell. You know how many people engaged with them? Zero. Because that's not relational. In fact, if they did engage with somebody, it would have been a hostile interaction. It would have been someone saying, "Who do you think you are, man?" Someone who wanted to prove that they were wrong. And it's one of the reasons why many Christians and evangelism in general gets a bad rap. That's not what we're called to do. We're called to share the love of Jesus Christ, the one who loves us, with the people that we love. And if you haven't built that kind of relationship, where do you begin? Build that relationship. In fact, I'm supposed to read a quote here. Out of the book again. Start by simply determining that your purpose in life is to participate with God in the progress of the gospel, and then begin seeing your daily encounters with others as special opportunities to bless and encourage them. No encounter is without value if you believe the story of the gospel includes everyone. The non-Christian barista who serves you at the counter isn't likely to become a believer merely because you come into the coffee shop with a friendly smile. But each of your interactions with him or her could contribute towards opening that person up to gospel conversations, whether with you or with somebody else. You start by building that relationship. All right, what was principle number 1? Do you remember? If not, look at your sheet. You have everything that you need to begin sharing Jesus with people right now. So put the 3 principles back up. Evangelism is an overflow of the Christian life. Are you a Christian? Yes. Evangelism is storytelling. Do you have a story? Yes. And evangelism is relational. Do you have relationships? Yes. If these are the 3 basics, and you're a Christian, and you have a story, and you know some people, then you already have everything that you need. But Pastor, my story, this actually happened in our mission team meeting last week, because we asked people to share their story. And I think people who've been in the church for their entire life have the hardest time with this part of it. Because they say, you know what, my story isn't going to connect with people because they're not in the church. They didn't grow up in the church, and I grew up in the church. Okay, first of all, whose story are we supposed to be telling? Jesus' story. In Jesus' story, you had an encounter with Jesus at some point. Whether you grew up, here's a great way to start. If you grew up in the church, you can say, you know what, I follow Jesus and I know him and love him, even though I grew up in the church. And people will be like, that's a miracle. Tell me how you did that. Because I know lots of people who grew up in the church who hate Jesus. So tell me why you love him. What's different about you, right? I don't care what your story is, how you connected with Jesus, it's going to connect with somebody. And by the way, the real point is Jesus will connect with them. And when they have an encounter with Jesus, it will change everything. And you can't disagree with that because that's what happened with you. So you have everything that you need. Right? Now, we're going to talk about some additional principles and talk about how you can get over some of those fears and how do you build those relationships and how do you tell the story. But the first thing we've got to become convinced of is that it's for you. You can do this. You can share the gospel with the people in your life. Now, of course, if you don't know anyone who doesn't know Jesus, fix that. I told you last week, one of the reasons I started a side hustle doing woodworking is because I realized as a pastor, everyone in my circle knows Jesus. Well, I got to get outside of that bubble. And I got to tell you, it's working. Dealt with a couple this week, and I'm just sharing stuff that's going on in my life. I had a customer this week, building something for them, and I was like, man, I got to tell you, it's going to take a little longer than I thought because I'm going to be going to Romania to help some Ukrainian refugees. She's like, what? Why are you doing that? Did you hear that question? Why are you doing that? Introduces the story. Why am I doing that? That's a great question. I'm doing that because I love people and Jesus loves me, and we got started talking. She's like, oh, you're a pastor of a church? I've been looking for a church for the last 10 years. No, you haven't. You're just lying to a pastor now. If you were looking for a church the last 10 years, you'd have found one, right? Because you know it's not really about the church, it's about Jesus. It's about knowing Him. See how easy that is when it's part of who you are? And you just tell the story and you just build relationships and work on those relationships. Now, what if the very first time I ever met her, I was like, man, I'm here to work on your hutch and I'm doing it for Jesus. What might she have said? Dude, you are weird. And you are pushy and it's too soon, right? It's too soon. But we built a relationship and I've gotten to know them a little bit and learned a little bit about them. Changes everything. I'm trying to figure this out just like you are. I got a different obstacle to overcome. People, right, learn I'm a pastor and there's a whole bunch of different stuff. But I'll get over that. That's my problem, not yours. All right, here's your homework. And I want you to do some of this right here this morning. On your sheet at the bottom. It says, I want you to write down the names of 3 people that you know and you are confident do not have a relationship with Jesus Christ. 3 people you know who you know don't know Jesus Christ. And I want you to write those names down. Okay? Then your homework for the week is on the back. I want you to commit to praying for each of those people and for yourself over this next week. Pray that God will give them a burden and desire to know Him. God calls people to Himself. Do you understand that? You don't have to do that calling. God will place people in your lives who are hungry and who have a need and a desire to know Jesus Christ. And just pray that God will place that burden and desire in their hearts. And then number 2, that God would give you a burden and desire for those who are lost and don't know Jesus and change your heart towards sharing your faith. If there's a roadblock in your way, ask Jesus, ask the Holy Spirit to knock that thing down. And for you to begin to see people the way that He sees them. And to care about sharing that message. Number 3, that God would open, and by the way, do not pray number 3 if you don't mean it. That God would open opportunities for you to begin having spiritual conversations with each person on that list, and that He will give you spiritual eyes to recognize those opportunities. If you pray that prayer and mean it, watch what happens. Those opportunities will come. And number 4, that God will give you courage and boldness to begin having spiritual conversations with these people, and that He will give you the right words to say and the things not to say. I think it's that which may be more important than the first. Just, open foot, insert mouth. Everyone got that? Foot disease, foot and mouth disease? Right? We're going to pray that God will heal you of foot and mouth disease and not say the stupid thing, but focus on Him. You ready? You got your 3 people in mind? And by the way, if it's 5, list 5. It's okay. I'm not going to check your homework. And commit every day to pray this prayer for yourself and for them, and then let's watch what happens. Let's stand and pray together. Father, we thank You for the story that You have worked in our lives. Each one of us has a story of the ways that we've encountered You, the ways that You've worked in our lives, the ways that You've brought healing through pain. Father, we are thankful for the gospel of Jesus Christ that has changed every single one of us. And I just pray that You'll give us a burden, that You'll give us, even beyond that burden, Father, maybe a fire within us to share the gospel, that You'll begin to remove these fears and these reservations that we have about sharing the gospel and stop worrying about what people are going to think about us and be more concerned about what they know about you. Father, open our eyes to see the opportunities to have spiritual conversations with people we've already built relationships with, and help us to begin to build relationships with people who don't know you. And to do that honestly, not as a used car salesman who just wants them to buy Jesus, but as someone who really cares about them, that cares about their heart and their life and their spirit and their family, and who wants healing and hope and peace to be brought into their life. And we know the only way that happens is through Jesus Christ. Father, thank you for the gospel. Open our hearts and minds to share the gospel with the people around us, and all God's people said.